The air in that Georgia plantation house was thick with cigar smoke and whiskey-soaked promises. 5 wealthy plantation owners sat around a mahogany table, their eyes gleaming with the kind of cruelty only absolute power breeds. The bet was simple, horrifying, and would change history. Could they feed a slave woman until she reached 400 pounds, feeding her nothing but rendered pig lard? The stakes were high 5 zeros, $0, 10 prime field slaves, and bragging rights that would echo through the corrupt halls of the Southern elite. But they chose the wrong woman. Her name was Clarissa, and behind her tired eyes burned a memory they couldn't see, a memory of the African priestess grandmother who taught her secrets the white masters would never understand. What started as their twisted entertainment would become their nightmare. Because Clarissa wasn't just surviving their torture, she was planning something that would paint the plantation red and leave 5 families destroyed. The documents were sealed for 90 years. The truth was buried with the bodies. Until now. Hey there, truth seekers. Before we dive into this absolutely shocking true story that was hidden from history books, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We're uncovering the darkest, most mysterious true stories that historians tried to bury. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'm reading every single one. And if this story sends chills down your spine, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves real historical mysteries. Now, let's enter the nightmare that was Willowbrook Plantation, 1847. The October moon hung fat and yellow over Willowbrook Plantation when Master Edmund Rothwell made the proposal that would doom them all. He was drunk. They all were, celebrating another year of blood-soaked profits from cotton and human misery. But Edmund wasn't satisfied with ordinary cruelty anymore. He'd grown bored. Gentlemen, he slurred, slamming his crystal glass on the table, I propose an experiment of scientific merit. The others leaned in, their faces flickering in candlelight like demons studying their next victim. My physician tells me the Negro constitution can endure remarkable deprivation. But can it endure abundance? Can we force one to eat until they become monstrous? The table erupted in laughter, but Edmund raised his hand. I'm serious. We select one female, young enough to survive, old enough to have birthed children so we know her body is resilient. We feed her nothing but pig lard, pure rendered fat, nothing else. No vegetables, no meat, no bread, just lard. We measure her monthly. First one whose property reaches 400 pounds wins the pot. William Crenshaw, owner of the neighboring Blackwater estate, leaned back with a calculating look. And what's the wager, Edmund? This sounds expensive in terms of property loss. $5,000 in gold, 10 of your finest field hands, and the satisfaction of proving which of us truly understands how to break the human spirit completely. Edmund's eyes glittered with something beyond greed. It was the intoxication of absolute power, the disease that infected men who owned other humans. The others exchanged glances. Charles Whitmore from Ashwood, Robert Pemberton from Ironwood Ridge, Dr. Alastair Blackburn, who owned no plantation but had grown wealthy selling his medical expertise to validate the torture of enslaved people, and the youngest, James Harrington, who'd inherited Meadowbrook at just 23 and was eager to prove himself among these titans of cruelty. They shook on it. 5 men, 5 plantations, 5 women who would be selected, imprisoned, and force-fed like geese being prepared for slaughter. But Edmund had already chosen his champion, Clarissa, 32 years old, mother of 4 children who'd been sold away one by one. She was strong, yes, but more importantly, she was broken. Or so he thought. What Edmund Rothwell didn't know was that Clarissa came from a lineage of West African priestesses who'd carried their knowledge across the Middle Passage, hidden in songs, in braided patterns, in the depths of eyes that seemed defeated but remembered everything. Her grandmother had whispered secrets to her in the dark, how to survive poison, how to appear weak while gathering strength, how to smile at your enemy while planning their destruction. Edmund thought he was choosing a victim. He was actually selecting his executioner. The next morning, Clarissa was dragged from her cabin by 2 overseers. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply looked at Master Rothwell with those deep, knowing eyes and said, "Yes, Master. Whatever you want, Master." Her voice was honey over broken glass, and for just a moment, Edmund felt something cold walk across his grave, but he dismissed it. She was property. He was God in human form, or so he believed. They took her to a specially prepared room in the plantation's old smokehouse, a windowless stone chamber with a single heavy door. Inside was a wooden bed, a chamber pot, and a table with 20 pounds of pure white pig lard sitting in a ceramic basin. The overseer, a vicious man named Pike, explained the rules with obvious pleasure in his voice. "You gonna eat 3 pounds of this here lard every day, morning, noon, and night. You don't eat it, we gonna force it down your throat with a funnel. You vomit it up, we gonna beat you and make you eat what you spit up, plus extra. You understand, girl?" Clarissa nodded slowly. She understood perfectly, and as the door slammed shut and the lock clicked into place, she smiled in the darkness. The first week, Clarissa ate the lard without resistance. She consumed it methodically, her face expressionless as the white grease coated her throat and settled heavy in her stomach. Pike and the other overseers watched through a slot in the door, disappointed that she wasn't fighting. They wanted screams. They wanted begging. Instead, they got eerie compliance that made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate. What they didn't see was what happened in the dark hours. Clarissa wasn't just surviving. She was preparing. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The body is a vessel, child. Fill it with what they give you, but fill your spirit with purpose. Pain is temporary. Revenge is eternal." Each night, she pressed her fingers into the stone walls, finding the loose mortar, slowly excavating a hiding place. She saved portions of lard, not for eating, but for something else. Something her grandmother had taught her about combustible materials and fire. By the second week, the other 4 women in the bet were breaking. At Blackwater Estate, a woman named Sarah had tried to refuse the lard and was held down by 3 men, while Dr. Blackburn himself forced a brass funnel between her teeth and poured melted lard down her throat until she choked and convulsed. At Ashwood, a teenager named Ruth was vomiting blood. The masters gathered for their first monthly weigh-in, excitement building like a fever. Edmund Rothwell arrived at the gathering with confident swagger. Clarissa had already gained 33 pounds, more than any of the others. Her face was swelling, her body expanding at an alarming rate, but her eyes remained clear and focused in a way that unsettled him when he bothered to look directly at her, which he rarely did. She was simply a thing now, an experiment, barely human in his eyes. "Gentlemen, I believe we have our victor already," Edmund announced, pouring bourbon for his co-conspirators. "My Clarissa is thriving on this diet. I told you, some of them have constitutions built for endurance. It's in their breeding, you see, like cattle." Dr. Blackburn examined Clarissa with cold, clinical precision, pinching her flesh, measuring her expanding waistline with a tailor's tape. Recording everything in his leather journal. "Fascinating," he muttered. "The human body's ability to process pure fat without protein or vegetation is remarkable. I shall write a paper on this for the Medical Society of Charleston. Of course, I'll leave out certain details about how the data was obtained." Clarissa stood there naked except for a thin shift. 5 white men examining her like livestock, and she smiled. It wasn't a slave's smile of appeasement. It was something else. Something that made Dr. Blackburn pause mid-measurement and step back involuntarily. "What's funny, girl?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Clarissa's smile widened. "Nothing, Master Doctor, just happy to serve." But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes promised things these men couldn't imagine. Back in her stone prison, the weight gain was becoming severe. 90 pounds in 3 months. Her joints ached. Her heart raced. Her skin stretched painfully. But Clarissa endured because she was counting the footsteps of each overseer, counting the minutes between their checks, counting the clicks of the lock mechanism. Most importantly, she was counting the confessions. Pike, the head overseer, had started talking to her through the door slot during his late night rounds. He was drunk most evenings, and in his whiskey-soaked state, he'd grown chatty. He told her things, terrible things about the other plantations, about secret graves in the woods, about masters who'd murdered slaves and burned the evidence. He told her about Edmund Rothwell's first wife, who'd mysteriously died after threatening to expose his business arrangements with slave traders who dealt in children. He told her where Edmund kept his money, his weapons, his secrets. Clarissa listened to everything. She memorized every word, and she asked careful questions that made Pike feel intelligent and important. Questions that made him reveal more and more. "Master Pike, you so smart. You must know everything that happened on this plantation. I bet Master Rothwell trusts you with all his business." And Pike, desperate to impress even a imprisoned slave woman, would nod and spill more secrets. By month 5, Clarissa had crossed 200 pounds. 2 of the other women were dead. Sarah at Blackwater had suffered a heart attack, and Ruth at Ashwood had developed an infection from the forced feedings and died screaming. The remaining 2 were barely conscious most days, their bodies shutting down in rebellion against the unnatural diet. But Clarissa remained alert, her mind sharp even as her body swelled grotesquely. Edmund was ecstatic. He'd already commissioned a special reinforced scale that could measure up to 500 pounds, confident of his victory. He threw parties where he'd bring his wealthy friends to peer through the door slot at the fat Negro woman, taking bets on whether she'd actually reach 400 pounds. They'd laugh and drink and treat her suffering as dinner entertainment. Each visitor who mocked her, Clarissa, memorized their face. Each name was added to her list. What none of them knew was that Clarissa had been slowly, carefully loosening a stone in the wall that led to a crawl space, an old ventilation shaft from when the smokehouse was actually used for smoking meat. It was narrow, almost impossibly so, but Clarissa was patient. She'd also been experimenting with the lard, mixing it with dust and straw from her mattress, creating primitive candles and fire-starting materials. Her grandmother's voice guided her. Fire cleanses, fire purifies, fire is justice. The 7th month brought winter cold, and Clarissa crossed 300 pounds. She could barely walk now without assistance. Her breathing was labored, but her hands were still strong, and every night she worked on her tunnel, on her preparations. The overseers had grown complacent. They'd check on her less frequently, assuming her immobility made her harmless. Their first fatal mistake. March 17th, 1847. The day Edmund Rothwell had been waiting for arrived with cold spring rain that turned the plantation roads to mud. Clarissa stepped onto the specially commissioned scale, supported by 2 overseers, her body now so massive she could barely stand unassisted. The needle swung, hesitated, and settled. 401 pounds. Edmund Rothwell had won his monstrous bet. The celebration that night was obscene. All 5 plantation owners gathered at Willowbrook's main house, their wives conveniently sent to Charleston for shopping. They drank the finest French wine, smoked Cuban cigars, and counted out the gold coins and slave deeds that would transfer to Edmund. Charles Whitmore handed over the deed to a family, husband, wife, 3 children, with the casual indifference of signing away livestock. "Congratulations, Edmund. You've proven that we can make them into anything we want, even monsters." Edmund laughed, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. "Gentlemen, the real lesson here is about absolute control. We didn't just feed her. We remade her. We played God with flesh and will, and we won. Tomorrow I'm thinking of putting her on display. Charge admission. Come see the 400-pound Negro woman. A testament to white ingenuity and scientific progress. The men roared with laughter, slapping the table, their humanity completely corroded by the acid of their own evil. What they didn't know was that at that exact moment, Clarissa was making her own preparations. Pike had come for his nightly check, drunk as usual, and this time Clarissa had asked him a question that would seal his fate. "Master Pike, what you gonna do with all that money Master Rothwell probably gave you for watching me so good?" Pike had puffed up with pride. "He ain't given me nothing extra yet, but he will. I know where he keeps his safe, in the library behind the Shakespeare books. Combination is his daughter's birthday, 8-15-22. Clarissa smiled that unsettling smile. "You deserve that money, Master Pike. You worked so hard." Pike nodded enthusiastically, not noticing how Clarissa's hands were positioned behind her back, not seeing that she'd finally worked completely free the loose stone in the wall, not understanding that she'd been manipulating him for 7 months straight, extracting every piece of information she needed. When he turned to leave, Clarissa whispered, "Master Pike, thank you for everything." Something in her voice made him turn back, confused. In that moment of hesitation, Clarissa moved. Despite her size, despite 7 months of torture, she moved with the sudden violence of a predator that had been playing dead. The stone, held in both hands, came down on Pike's skull with a wet, crushing sound. He dropped without a cry, blood pooling dark on the stone floor. Clarissa stood over him, breathing hard, her body screaming in pain, but her spirit singing with terrible joy. She worked quickly. From Pike's body, she took his keys, his knife, and a small pistol he kept in his boot. 1 shot, but that would be enough for a start. She dragged herself to the ventilation shaft she'd been widening for months. It was almost impossibly narrow, but Clarissa had planned for this. Using Pike's knife, she cut deep into her own arms and torso, letting blood flow, using it as lubricant. The pain was extraordinary, but pain was an old friend now. She pushed herself into the shaft, her enormous body scraping stone, tearing fabric and flesh, but moving forward. It took her an hour to traverse 30 feet. She emerged in the old stable, unused for years, her body covered in blood and stone dust, looking like something that had crawled up from hell itself. And perhaps she had. The main house was 300 yards away, every window blazing with light and echoing with the laughter of 5 men who thought themselves untouchable. Clarissa moved through the slave quarters like a ghost. People saw her and gasped, making the sign of the cross, unsure if she was woman or spirit. She went to the cabin that had been her home before her imprisonment, the home she'd shared with her 4 children before they were sold away one by one. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the floorboards, was something her grandmother had given her before she died. A small clay pot sealed with wax, filled with powder made from plants that grew deep in the swamps. "Use this only for justice," her grandmother had whispered. "Use this only when the evil is too great for heaven to ignore." Clarissa broke the seal. The powder inside smelled of earth and death and ancient knowledge. She mixed it with lard, creating small balls that she could throw. Her grandmother had called it Hell's Promise, a powder that, when mixed with fat and exposed to flame, would burn with unholy intensity, clinging to whatever it touched, impossible to extinguish with water alone. Clarissa filled Pike's coat pockets with these deadly spheres. By midnight, the celebration in the main house had reached its peak of debauchery. The men were thoroughly drunk, their judgment destroyed by alcohol, and the intoxication of evil celebrated. Edmund was showing the others his accounting books and ledgers where he tracked every slave, every punishment, every death with cold numerical precision. "You see, gentlemen, the key to profitability is viewing them as renewable resources. Work them hard, replace them when they break, show no sentimentality. Clarissa approached the house from the kitchen entrance. The cook, an elderly woman named Bessie who'd been kind to Clarissa years ago, was cleaning up from the feast. When she saw Clarissa, covered in blood, impossibly huge, moving with determined purpose, Bessie simply nodded. "Go on, child. Do what needs doing. I'll make sure nobody comes through here." She handed Clarissa a candle. "May God have mercy on their souls, 'cause I sure don't." Clarissa climbed the back stairs, each step agony on her tortured body, but driven forward by something beyond pain. By justice denied for too long, by children stolen, by humanity crushed and mocked. She could hear their voices in the library, still laughing, still celebrating their victory over her flesh, while remaining blind to the war her spirit had been waging. She positioned herself outside the library door. With Pike's knife, she jammed the lock mechanism. With furniture from the hallway, she blocked the front entrance. The back stairs she doused with cooking oil Bessie had provided. The men were trapped, though they didn't know it yet. Clarissa lit her candle, whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her. Not to the white man's God, but to older spirits, spirits of justice and balance and righteous fury. And she threw open the library door. The library door crashed open, and 5 heads turned in unison. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The men stared at the apparition in the doorway. A massive woman covered in blood and stone dust, eyes blazing with something that transcended human rage, holding a flickering candle like it was the torch of an avenging angel. Edmund Rothwell's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the Persian rug. Clarissa. His voice was barely a whisper, disbelief and the first tendrils of genuine fear creeping into his alcohol-soaked brain. "How did you, Pike, Pike?" He screamed for his overseer, but Pike was already cold on the smokehouse floor, his skull cracked open like a rotten melon. Clarissa smiled that terrible smile and stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. "Pike ain't coming, Master Rothwell. None of your devils coming to save you tonight." Her voice was different now, not the submissive slave dialect she'd used for years, but something educated, articulate, carrying the weight of her grandmother's African nobility and her own suppressed intelligence. "You gentlemen made a bet. You won. Now it's time to collect your real prize." William Crenshaw lurched to his feet, his hand reaching for the dueling pistol he kept in his coat. He never made it. Clarissa's arm whipped forward, and one of her grandmother's powder balls struck him square in the chest. The candle's flame was all it needed. Crenshaw erupted in fire, not ordinary fire, but something that burned green and white, flames that clung to his skin like living things, spreading impossibly fast. His screams were primal, inhuman, as he stumbled backward into the heavy curtains, which ignited instantly. "Water, get water." Dr. Blackburn shrieked, but even as he grabbed a decanter of brandy and threw it at Crenshaw, he realized his mistake. The alcohol made the flames explode with renewed fury. Crenshaw collapsed, still burning, his screams finally dying as his lungs filled with superheated smoke. The smell of burning flesh filled the room, a smell all of them knew well from their punishments of slaves, but never expected to experience from the other side. Edmund ran for the door, yanking the handle desperately. Locked, jammed, he pounded with both fists, screaming for help, but the house staff, all enslaved people who'd suffered under these men, had mysteriously disappeared into the night. Or more accurately, they were standing outside in the rain, watching the library windows begin to glow orange, their faces showing not horror but grim satisfaction. Bessie stood among them, praying quietly, not for the master's souls, for Clarissa's peace. Charles Whitmore tried to rush Clarissa, thinking his size and strength would overwhelm her despite her bulk. She was ready. Pike's knife flashed in the firelight, catching him across the throat. Not deep enough to kill instantly, but enough to open his windpipe. He grabbed at his neck, blood spurting between his fingers, his eyes wide with the shock of someone who'd never imagined himself as victim. He fell to his knees, drowning in his own blood, making gurgling sounds that might have been pleas for mercy. "Did they beg?" Clarissa asked quietly, standing over him. "Did Sarah beg when you forced that funnel down her throat? Did Ruth beg when the infection was eating her from the inside?" Charles tried to speak, but only blood came out. Clarissa watched him die with the same clinical detachment Dr. Blackburn had shown during his examinations. "I thought not." The fire was spreading now, catching the book-lined walls, the expensive furniture, the documents that recorded decades of human misery disguised as business transactions. James Harrington, the youngest, barely 23 years old, had collapsed in the corner, sobbing. "Please, please, I'm sorry. I didn't want to do this. My father made me. I inherited this hell. I didn't choose it." Clarissa looked at him for a long moment, part of her. The part that still remembered mercy, still remembered her own children's faces, almost wavered. "Almost you had choices," she said softly, kneeling down with difficulty, her massive body making her movements slow but inexorable. "Every day you chose to continue. Every morning you woke up and chose evil. You chose comfort over conscience. You inherited evil, and you embraced it." She pressed another powder ball against his chest. His eyes went wide. Wait, the candle touched the ball, and James Harrington became a pillar of flame, his young body fuel for the justice fire. His screams joined the crackling roar of the burning library, a symphony of retribution that had been building for centuries of unpunished atrocities. Only two remained now, Edmund Rothwell and Dr. Alastair Blackburn, both pressed against the locked door, coughing in the thickening smoke, their fine clothes already singed, their faces streaked with soot and terror. The heat was becoming unbearable. The floor was beginning to catch. Clarissa stood in the center of the inferno, seemingly immune to the flames that licked at her blood-stained dress, a massive figure backlit by orange fire, looking like something out of biblical prophecy. "You wanted to prove a point," Clarissa said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You wanted to show your power over flesh. You fed me your poison, measured my suffering, turned my body into a monument to your cruelty. But you forgot something, masters." She took a step closer, and both men whimpered, pressing harder against the unyielding door. "You forgot that the human spirit can't be fattened or starved. You forgot that memory lives in blood and bone. You forgot that every mother remembers her stolen children." Dr. Blackburn, his scientific mind still trying to process impossibilities even as death surrounded him, gasped, "The fire! You should be. No one could survive this heat." Clarissa smiled, and for the first time, there was something almost pitying in her expression. "You spent your whole life studying our bodies, doctor, writing your papers, taking your measurements, and you never once studied our souls. That was your fatal mistake." She reached into her pocket and pulled out two more powder balls, the last ones. "Edmund Rothwell, Dr. Alastair Blackburn, you both gonna die tonight. But I want you to know something first. I want you to know that I remember my daughter Lily. You sold her when she was 8, Master Edmund, because your wife wanted a new piano. I remember my son Joshua. You used him to test your medicines, doctor, until they destroyed his mind. I remember every lash, every insult, every day you treated us like we was less than human. And I want you to die knowing that a thing you created killed you. I want you to die knowing that you was never God's. You was just evil men, and tonight you pay." Edmund lunged forward in a desperate final attack, but his body was weak from decades of soft living while others did his labor. Clarissa caught him easily, pressing the powder ball against his chest. "You made me a monster, Master Edmund. Now meet the monster you created." The flame touched. Edmund Rothwell became a screaming torch, stumbling blindly around the room, igniting everything he touched, spreading the fire even faster. Dr. Blackburn had nowhere left to go. The entire room was burning now, the heat so intense that books were spontaneously combusting on their shelves. He sank to his knees, his scientific mind finally broken. "What are you?" he whispered. Clarissa pressed the final ball against his forehead, almost gently, like a benediction. "I'm justice, doctor. I'm the bill come due. I'm every prayer you thought went unheard. I'm the answer to your evil." The flame touched, and Dr. Blackburn's screams joined the symphony. Clarissa stood in the center of the inferno, 5 corpses burning around her, and allowed herself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what she'd done. The heat was no longer theoretical. It was real, consuming, deadly. The mystical protection she'd believed in, the ancestral spirits she'd prayed to, they had given her courage but not immunity. Her skin was blistering. Her lungs were filling with smoke. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the fire killed her, just as surely as it had killed her torturers. But Clarissa hadn't survived 7 months of torture by giving up. She grabbed Edmund Rothwell's body, still twitching, still burning, and dragged it toward the window. The glass had already cracked from the heat, spider webbing across its surface. Using the corpse as a battering ram, she smashed through, feeling the blessed cool night air rush in even as it fed oxygen to the flames behind her, causing an explosion of heat that propelled her forward. She fell 12 feet, landing hard in the muddy flower bed below. Her massive weight should have broken bones, but the soft earth and her own cushioning fat absorbed the impact. She lay there for a moment, rain falling on her burned face, steam rising from her body, wondering if she was dead, and this was some transitional space between worlds. Then pain crashed over her in waves, and she knew with grim certainty that she was still alive. The dead don't hurt like this. Behind her, Willowbrook's main house was fully engulfed. The fire had spread from the library to the adjoining rooms with supernatural speed, or perhaps there was nothing supernatural about it at all. Old wood, expensive fabrics, alcohol, soaked carpets, decades of accumulated wealth that burned as readily as any kindling. The remaining overseers and house staff had fled into the night. Some of the field slaves stood watching, their faces illuminated by the orange glow, expressions ranging from terror to exultation. Clarissa forced herself to stand. Every movement was agony. She'd lost blood, gained burns, torn muscles, and possibly broken ribs in the fall. But she couldn't stop yet. She stumbled toward the slave quarters, leaving a trail of blood and burnt fabric behind her. The first person she encountered was an old man named Solomon, who'd been at Willowbrook longer than anyone could remember, his back a roadmap of scar tissue from countless whippings. "Sweet Jesus," Solomon whispered, staring at her. "Clarissa, what have you done, child?" His voice held no judgment, only awe and fear of the consequences. Clarissa grabbed his shoulders, her grip surprisingly strong. "Solomon, listen, this fire gonna spread. You need to get everyone away from the big house. Then you need to run, all of you, tonight. Don't wait for morning. Don't pack belongings, just RUN. Head north to the swamp. There's people there who'll help you. Tell them Clarissa sent you. Tell them Rothwell Plantation is finished." Solomon's eyes widened. "There's 40 people here, Clarissa. Women, children, old folks like me. We can't all—" Clarissa shook him, her burned face inches from his. "You can. You will. This is your only chance. By morning, every slave catcher in Georgia gonna be looking for whoever did this. They ain't gonna believe it was just me. They gonna hang everyone they can catch. You understand? Everyone." The truth of her words struck Solomon like a physical blow. He nodded slowly, then turned and began running from cabin to cabin, his old legs finding speed born of terror and hope mixed together. "Everyone up. Grab the children. We leaving now." Within minutes, the slave quarters erupted into controlled chaos, people grabbing babies, helping elders, whispering urgent prayers and goodbyes to a place that had been their prison. Clarissa made her way to the old smokehouse where she'd been imprisoned. Pike's body was still there, already cold. She took his coat, the one she'd filled with her makeshift weapons, and put it on despite the pain of fabric against her burns. She took his money pouch, his second knife, and most importantly, a small leather-bound book he kept in his inner pocket. She'd seen him writing in it sometimes, muttering as he did. Now, sitting on the floor next to his corpse, she opened it by the light of the distant fire. What she found made her blood run cold despite everything she'd just done. It was a record, not official, but detailed, of crimes that went far beyond the legal horrors of slavery. Pike had documented murders of slaves whose deaths were never reported. He'd recorded Edmund Rothwell's involvement in a smuggling operation that brought illegal slaves from Africa, even after the trade was banned. Most damning, there were names and dates connecting all 5 plantation owners to the disappearance of a federal marshal who'd been investigating them 3 years ago. "You fool," Clarissa whispered to Pike's corpse. "You wrote down everything. You kept the evidence they would have killed you for if they'd known." She tucked the book into the coat's inner pocket. This was more than just evidence of her own grievances. This was dynamite that could destroy families, ruin political careers, expose a network of corruption that reached all the way to Charleston and beyond. Pike's documentation of evil would become her insurance policy. By the time Clarissa emerged from the smokehouse, Willowbrook's main house was collapsing in on itself, sending towers of sparks into the rainy night sky. The blaze was visible for miles, a beacon that would draw every white person in the county by morning. She could already hear church bells ringing in the distance, the alarm spreading that something catastrophic had happened at one of the region's most prominent plantations. She found Bessie helping load children into a wagon that someone had hitched with stolen horses. The old cook looked at Clarissa with something like reverence. "Child, what you did tonight. They gonna hunt you till the end of your days. You know that, don't you?" Clarissa nodded. "I know, but Bessie, I need you to do something for me. When they question you, you tell them I died in the fire. You tell them you saw me trapped in the library with the masters, that I was trying to save them, that I was the faithful slave until the very end." Bessie's eyebrows shot up. "You want me to lie, to protect you?" Clarissa shook her head. "Not to protect me, to protect all of you. If they think I'm dead, they won't push as hard to find accomplices. They'll call it a tragic accident, a fire that killed everyone. But if they know I escaped, they'll torture every person on this plantation to find out who helped me. And Bessie, you did help me. That cooking oil you gave me, that candle, your silence when I walked past you. That was help. That was courage. And I won't let you die for my revenge." Tears streamed down Bessie's weathered face. She pulled Clarissa into an embrace, careful of her burns. "Where you gonna go?" Clarissa looked toward the dark tree line beyond the fields, toward the swamp that had swallowed runaways before, and could swallow her too. "Into the darkness, into the water, into whatever comes next. But Bessie, if I survive this, I'm gonna make sure their evil gets exposed. I got Pike's records. I got proof of things that'll shake this whole rotten system." Behind them, a secondary explosion rocked what remained of the main house, probably the gun room, filled with powder and ammunition. The sound was like thunder, causing several children to cry out in fear. Clarissa knew her time was up. Already she could see torches in the distance, riders coming to investigate the fire. "Go," she told Bessie. "Take them north, get them to freedom. Let that be what tonight was about, not just revenge, but liberation." Bessie nodded, climbing into the wagon. As it pulled away, packed with escaping slaves, Clarissa heard them begin to sing. Quietly, carefully, but with unmistakable defiance. It was an old spiritual, one that carried coded messages about escape routes and safe houses, one that slaveholders heard as religious submission, but was actually a roadmap to freedom. The sound followed Clarissa as she limped toward the swamp, her 400-pound body leaving deep tracks in the mud that the rain slowly began to wash away. She paused at the edge of the tree line and looked back one final time. Willowbrook was dying, its elegant columns collapsing, its white paint bubbling and burning, all that architectural beauty built on human suffering finally consuming itself. 5 men were dead. 40 people were fleeing toward freedom. And somewhere in the ruins were documents and ledgers that, if they survived the fire, might tell the wrong story, or no story at all. Clarissa smiled grimly and turned toward the darkness. The swamp was dangerous, filled with snakes, alligators, and treacherous bogs that could swallow a person whole. But she'd take her chances with natural predators over human ones any day. As she disappeared into the dense vegetation, the last thing visible was a trail of blood diluting in the rain, leading nowhere and everywhere at once. The Okefenokee swamp had no mercy, but it had memory. For generations, enslaved people had fled into its murky depths, some finding freedom, most finding death. The water was black as ink, hiding roots that could snap an ankle and sinkholes that could drag a person down in seconds. Alligators lurked in every shadow, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. Venomous snakes hung from cypress branches like deadly ornaments. But Clarissa walked into this night mere willingly, because she knew one truth the slave catchers hadn't learned. The swamp protected those who understood its language. Her grandmother had been a swamp woman before she was captured, stolen from the coastal regions where water and land mixed in ways that defied European understanding. She'd taught Clarissa the signs, how to read the water's surface for safe passage, which plants could heal and which could kill, how to move through water without disturbing it in ways that attracted predators. Now, as Clarissa waded deeper, her burned skin screaming in protest against the bacteria, rich water, she whispered prayers in a language her grandmother had taught her, a language older than English, older than slavery, old as Africa itself. Behind her, the manhunt was already beginning. By dawn, the charred ruins of Willowbrook revealed a horror show that shocked even hardened slave catchers. 5 prominent men, burned beyond recognition but identifiable by their jewelry and location. Pike, his skull crushed in what was clearly murder, and most disturbing, no sign of Clarissa's body in the smokehouse or anywhere else. The padlock on the smokehouse door had been unlocked from the outside. Blood trails led toward the main house, then away, then disappeared in the rain-washed mud. Sheriff Augustus Crane arrived with 50 armed men and a pack of bloodhounds. He was a massive man with a reputation for brutality that exceeded even the normal standards of slave catching. He'd personally hanged 17 runaways in his career, always taking his time, always making sure nearby slaves watched. He stood in the ruins of the library, looking at the 5 corpses, and his face went white with rage. 5 white men, he said quietly, his voice shaking. 5 of Georgia's finest murdered by what? A slave woman. His deputy, a nervous man named Hutchins, cleared his throat. Sir, the survivors say she was unnatural. They say she walked through fire. They say she was huge, like a demon, covered in blood, and Crane back handed him so hard Hutchins fell to his knees. I don't want to hear that superstitious nonsense. She's a woman. A fat, murderous slave woman who somehow got loose and killed her betters. We're going to find her, and we're going to make an example that'll echo through every plantation from here to Virginia. But the bloodhounds, normally infallible, lost her trail at the swamp's edge. They circled, whining, refusing to enter the water. Crane ordered men in anyway, offering $1,000 in gold to whoever brought back Clarissa's body, live or dead, preferably alive, so they could hang her properly. 20 men waded in, their confidence bolstered by guns and torches, and the absolute certainty of their racial superiority. 18 came back out. 2 simply vanished, their screams cutting off suddenly in the darkness. Clarissa heard those screams from her hiding place. She'd found a massive hollow cypress tree, its interior large enough to accommodate even her bulk, elevated enough to be dry despite the surrounding water. She'd packed the hollow with moss for insulation, and found a position where she could remain still for hours. Her burns were infected. She could feel the fever building, the poison spreading through her blood. But she'd also found what she was looking for: Devil's Walking Stick, a thorny plant her grandmother had called by its African name, one that could draw out infection if prepared correctly. Using Pike's knife, she cut strips from her already tattered dress and created poultices, mixing the plant bark with mud and her own saliva, creating a paste she applied to the worst burns. The pain was indescribable, like pressing hot coals against raw flesh. But within hours, she could feel the difference. The fever broke slightly. The red streaks creeping up her arms receded. Her grandmother's medicine, passed down through generations of women who'd survived impossible things, was fighting the infection that modern medicine would have had no answer for. For 3 days, she remained in that tree, moving only at night to find water and edible plants. She lost weight rapidly, not from her original 401 pounds, but from her body consuming itself to fight infection and maintain heat. She could hear the search parties, their frustrated voices echoing across the water. She could hear the rewards being announced, climbing higher each day, $1,000, then $2,000, then $5,000. She was now the most wanted person in Georgia, perhaps in the entire South. On the 4th night, someone else found her. Not a slave catcher, but another refugee. His name was Marcus, and he'd been running for 6 weeks after killing an overseer who'd tried to rape his wife. He was gaunt, exhausted, half mad from fear and isolation. He stumbled upon Clarissa's hiding place by accident, his torch illuminating her massive form wedged into the tree, and he nearly screamed before her hand shot out and covered his mouth. "Quiet," she hissed. "You want them to find us both." Marcus's eyes, white and wild in the torchlight, gradually focused and understood. She released him slowly. He stared at her, recognition dawning. "You're her, the one who burned Willowbrook? They saying you killed 5 white men? They saying you're a witch, a demon, that you made a deal with the devil himself?" Clarissa laughed bitterly. "No devil needed, Marcus. Just 7 months of torture and a grandmother who taught me things they can't understand." Marcus shook his head in wonder. "There's people in the swamp, you know. Maroons. Runaways who have built villages in the deep parts where white folks won't go. They hear about what you did. They calling you a hero, a warrior. A sign that the tide is turning." Clarissa felt something unexpected. Pride, sharp and painful. She'd acted from personal vengeance, from a mother's grief and a tortured woman's rage. But others were making her into a symbol, a story, a hope. "Can you take me to them?" she asked. "These maroon villages." Marcus hesitated. "They don't trust strangers easy. But you're different. You're the woman who burned the devil's house down. Yeah, they'll take you in. But Miss Clarissa, you need to know. They saying the governor himself put up the reward now. $10,000. They bringing in special hunters from Virginia, men who track people like we're animals. And they saying they gonna burn every slave quarter in Georgia till someone gives you up." Clarissa's blood ran cold. She'd known there would be retaliation, but this was collective punishment on an unprecedented scale. Innocent people would die because of what she'd done. Children would watch their parents hang. Families would be torn apart and sold south to the brutal sugar plantations of Louisiana. All because she'd chosen revenge over submission. For a moment, the weight of it nearly crushed her. But then she remembered her daughter Lily's face when they dragged her away. Remembered her son Joshua, mind destroyed by Dr. Blackburn's experiments. Drooling and empty-eyed in his final days. Remembered every woman who'd been raped, every man who'd been whipped, every child who'd been sold, every human being reduced to property by the system these 5 men had embodied. And she hardened her heart against guilt. "Take me to your maroons," she said to Marcus, "and bring me paper and ink if you can find any. I got something that needs writing down, something that'll make them regret ever offering a reward on my head." She patted the inner pocket of Pike's coat, where his damning journal remained safe and dry. "I got a story to tell, Marcus. A true story about what really goes on in those big houses. And before this is over, the whole world's gonna hear it. They traveled deeper into the swamp that night, Clarissa following Marcus through paths only visible to those who knew how to read the subtle signs, scratches on tree bark, stones stacked in certain patterns, arrangements of floating vegetation that looked random but weren't. Behind them, the search party's torches grew more distant, their frustrated shouts fading into the symphony of night birds and alligator calls. After 3 hours of careful movement, they arrived at something Clarissa had thought was legend, a genuine maroon settlement. 20 structures built on stilts above the swamp water, connected by rope bridges, invisible from ground level, populated by escaped slaves who'd created their own society in the one place white authority feared to tread. Men, women, and children emerged from the structures staring at the massive woman who'd become a ghost story come to life. An old woman, scarred and powerful, stepped forward. She wore necklaces of bone and shell, and her eyes held the same ancient knowledge Clarissa's grandmother had possessed. "I am Mama Zuri," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "I am the keeper of this place, the protector of those the world has rejected. You are Clarissa. We know your name. We know your deeds. The question is, what do you bring us besides danger? Why should we risk everything we've built to shelter a woman the whole state wants dead?" Clarissa met her eyes without flinching. She pulled out Pike's journal and held it up. "I bring proof," she said. "Proof of murders beyond what they can justify with their laws. Proof of corruption that reaches the governor's office. Proof that'll burn their system down more surely than any fire I set. I bring the truth, Mama Zuri, and if we're smart, if we're careful, we can use it to strike a blow that'll echo through history." Mama Zuri's eyes gleamed with interest. "Show me," she commanded, and as Clarissa opened the journal and began to read Pike's careful documentation of evil, a smile spread across the old woman's scarred face. "Oh, yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, this changes everything." 6 weeks after the Willowbrook fire, a package arrived at the offices of the Boston Liberator, the most radical abolitionist newspaper in America. Editor William Lloyd Garrison opened it himself, expecting another letter from sympathetic readers. Instead, he found a leather-bound journal, water-stained and blood-stained, accompanied by a single handwritten note. "This is the truth they kill to hide. Print it, and let the devil take the consequences." A witness to evil, Garrison read through the night. Pike's meticulous records documented horrors that even hardened abolitionists found difficult to process. Not just the legal brutalities of slavery, but a network of crimes that violated even the South's own laws. The smuggling of illegally imported Africans, the murder of a federal marshal, the systematic poisoning of slaves to test medicines for white patients, the deliberate breeding programs that treated human beings like livestock, and most explosive, detailed records of payments to politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials who protected the 5 plantation owners. But what made Garrison pause, what made his hands tremble as he held the pages, was the final entry, written in different handwriting, clearly added after Pike's death. "My name is Clarissa. I was fed only lard for 7 months as part of a bet between the monsters whose crimes this book documents. They fattened me like a pig for slaughter, measured my suffering, celebrated my degradation. On March 17, 1847, I reminded them that pigs have teeth. I killed them all and I would do it again. I am not sorry. I am not repentant. I am justice delayed, but justice nonetheless. Let this record stand as testimony. There are some evils too great for heaven to forgive and too terrible for hell to punish. So the living must do what angels cannot." Garrison published the journal in serialized form over 3 months. The response was unprecedented. Northern newspapers picked up the story. Church pulpits thundered about it. The documented proof of corruption involving Georgia's governor led to investigations that toppled careers and destroyed political alliances. But the South's reaction was even more dramatic and violent. The search for Clarissa intensified to obsessive levels. The reward climbed to $20,000, an astronomical sum. But something strange was happening. The more they hunted her, the more she became mythological. Slaves across Georgia and beyond began singing songs about her. They whispered stories about the woman who walked through fire, who killed 5 devils with her bare hands, who'd grown fat on the master's poison and used that very weight as a weapon of vengeance. Every unsolved fire, every dead overseer, every act of resistance became attributed to Clarissa or her disciples. She was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Some swore they'd seen her, a massive woman emerging from swamps, from forests, from the darkness itself to deliver justice. Slave owners grew paranoid, seeing threats in every shadow. The psychological impact of her escape was almost as damaging as her actual revenge. The truth was both simpler and stranger. Clarissa remained in Mama Zuri's maroon settlement for 3 months, slowly recovering from her burns and infections. The isolation and the swamp's natural resources allowed her to survive, but the stress on her body had been too great. The forced weight gain, the starvation of nutrients despite abundance of calories, the burns, the infection, all of it had damaged her internally in ways no medicine of that era could fully heal. By June, she was coughing blood. By July, she could barely walk. Mama Zuri, who'd seen dozens of people die in her years in the swamp, recognized the signs. "Your body is giving out, daughter," she said gently one evening as they sat by the fire. "You struck your blow, you told your truth, but the weapon they made of your flesh is killing you now." Clarissa nodded. She'd known for weeks. She could feel herself dying, cell by cell, system by system. "I need to tell you something," Clarissa said, her voice weak. "Something I never told anyone." Mama Zuri leaned closer. "My children, Lily, Joshua, Samuel, and little Grace. They're still alive, at least 3 of them. I found out from Pike's journal where they were sold. Lily's at a plantation in Alabama. Joshua died, but Samuel and Grace are in Mississippi. If anyone ever can reach them, tell them their mama didn't die a slave. Tell them their mama fought back. Tell them they come from warriors, not victims." Mama Zuri took Clarissa's swollen hand in her scarred one. "I'll make sure the story reaches them, and their children, and their children's children. What you did here, it's not just about revenge. You showed everyone, white and black alike, that we ain't just property that submits. We human beings who can strike back. That truth is more dangerous to them than any army." On August 12, 1847, Clarissa died in the swamp. She was 33 years old. Mama Zuri and the Maroon community buried her in a secret location, marked only by stones arranged in patterns that meant something to those who knew how to read them. No coffin, no marker, no name, but a grave that dozens of escaped slaves would visit over the coming years, leaving offerings and prayers, treating the site like the shrine it became. But the story doesn't end with Clarissa's death. The publication of Pike's journal had consequences that rippled for decades. 3 politicians committed suicide rather than face the investigations. The governor of Georgia was forced to resign in disgrace. The scandal weakened the political power of plantation owners across the South at a crucial moment, just 14 years before the Civil War would begin. More importantly, Clarissa's story became ammunition for abolitionists. Frederick Douglass wrote about her in his newspaper. Harriet Beecher Stowe considered including a character based on her in Uncle Tom's Cabin. Her tale was told in secret gatherings of enslaved people, whispered in fields and slave quarters, sung in coded spirituals. She became a symbol of resistance, proof that the oppressed could fight back and win, even if victory came with the ultimate price. The 5 families whose patriarchs died at Willowbrook never recovered their status. The scandal and the loss of leadership in the fire broke them. Willowbrook itself was abandoned, becoming a ruin that locals claimed was haunted. Even poor whites refused to salvage materials from it. By the 1850s, it was a blackened skeleton, a monument to the consequences of absolute evil. Decades after the Civil War, a researcher named Thomas Williamson tried to compile a complete history of the Willowbrook incident. He interviewed elderly former slaves who remembered the story, traced property records, and attempted to separate fact from legend. His unpublished manuscript, discovered in 1943, concluded, whether Clarissa killed 5 men or whether the fire was partly accidental may never be known with certainty. Whether she possessed supernatural abilities or simply extraordinary courage is a matter of belief. But what cannot be disputed is this: her act of resistance, and the evidence she preserved and disseminated, contributed to the erosion of slavery's moral justification in ways that no single slave rebellion had before. She was both victim and victor, both destroyed and triumphant. Her story deserves to be remembered not as a footnote, but as a testament to the indomitable nature of human dignity. But perhaps the most fitting epilogue comes from an unexpected source. In 1889, a woman named Lily Washington, a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, born into slavery in Alabama, published a memoir. In it, she wrote, "I was told my mother died when I was young, but when I was 16, an old woman found me and told me the truth. She told me my mother was Clarissa, and she told me what my mother did. For years, I struggled with this knowledge. How could I be proud of murder? How could I celebrate violence? But as I learned more about what was done to her, to us, to millions of us, I understood. My mother was not a murderer. She was a warrior. She was justice in human form. And every day I teach children to read. Every day I help former slaves claim their freedom and dignity. I am continuing her work. She burned down a house. I am helping to build a new world. The truth is, Clarissa's story was never meant to be inspirational in a comfortable way. It's not a tale of forgiveness or peaceful resistance. It's a mirror held up to the darkest chapter of American history, reflecting the inevitable consequences when human beings are pushed beyond all limits of endurance. She was not a saint. She was not a monster. She was a woman who was tortured, who lost everything, and who decided that if she had to die, she would die as a human being who fought back rather than as property that submitted. In the end, the system that created Clarissa, that bet on her suffering, that measured her degradation, that turned her body into a monument to cruelty, was itself burned down. Not immediately, not solely because of her, but she was one flame among many that eventually consumed the entire edifice of slavery. The 5 men who thought they were playing God learned too late that even gods can die when the oppressed remember they're human. Somewhere in an unmarked grave in the Okefenokee swamp, beneath water and cypress roots, beneath moss and accumulated centuries, lies the body of a woman who weighed 401 pounds when she killed 5 men and started a fire that, in its way, never stopped burning. Her name was Clarissa, and now, finally, her story has been told. The truth doesn't always comfort us, but it always eventually surfaces. And some truths burn brighter than any fire.